I'm often asked to talk about the disputes that are tearing apart the field of reading and about where I stand in relationship to those disputes. So let me first be really clear that there are things that are not disputed, despite what the media says. No one trivializes the importance of phonics for kindergarten, first, and second grade children. And no one trivializes that our ultimate goal is to have kids who are avid, lifelong readers and writers. Motivation matters. Some people, you could call them phonics first or science of reading people, focus more on phonics, leaning largely on a kind of skill and drill approach to teaching, and suggesting that young kids need a really heavy dose of phonics before they read and write. Meanwhile, others, balanced literacy educators, focus more on kids being engaged in meaningful reading and writing work that allows even the youngest learners to use their knowledge of letters and sounds in order to read and to write. Most educators, though, are centrist, and I am as well. And talking about disputes and camps perpetuates a kind of us versus them dichotomy and ends up creating caricatures, many of which are really inaccurate. Most educators aren't extremists. If you think of a seesaw, most educators, and I count myself among them, recognize that there are kids who need this and kids who need that. Most educators want to learn from both ends of the seesaw, bringing together all that works for kids. From a phonics first approach, we can be grateful for the reminder that teachers need professional development in the teaching of phonics, so that nobody feels at a loss when they're working with a child who has print-based struggles. My dad's a doctor and at a medical school, and he always would take the interns and residents on rounds. They would go from one patient's bed to another, and at each bedside, they would all pool their knowledge of this particular patient and the patient's data, and they'd talk about possible solutions and share insights for that patient. And I think what we're coming to understand is that there needs to be a similar sort of rounds in schools, where we have conversation about readers who make us struggle so that we can think together about how best to help them. I just want to add an aside that there is no magic pill that presto will solve the need for more PD and phonics. Some think that the program letters is a magic cure, but actually there isn't evidence to suggest that it's going to be a panacea. And I would encourage schools to do even more to provide teachers with the professional development in phonics that they need. To go back to what else we're learning from phonics first educators, I think that I'm learning that I think that it's really pretty important for schools to provide teachers with a curriculum in phonics that is sequenced in child-friendly and research-based ways. Of course, you always need to say to teachers, you can innovate on this curriculum because we need to be responding to kids, and kids are different. Sometimes innovating off of a published phonics curriculum is especially essential because sometimes schools adopt a curriculum that isn't designed to help teachers actually embed phonics in the real reading and writing that kids are doing, and that's especially essential. And then I would say, from a phonics-first approach, I also think we need to be grateful for the reminder that the kinds of books that kids are reading determines what reading means for them. And we need to be sure that kindergarten, first grade kids are reading a balanced diet of books. If we want kids to be decoding as soon as, say, October or November, it's really important to give them some of those books that are controlled, that allow them to practice the phonics that they've been learning in school as they're reading and writing. Now, from a balanced literacy approach, I think we need to renew our commitment to being sure that kids are deeply involved in reading and writing books and other kinds of texts that they want to read. Yesterday, I talked to a parent, and she said, Lucy, I'm going to cry when I tell you about this, but yesterday, Mariah went to the library and she asked for a book that she particularly wanted, and when that book wasn't there, she went and bought the book with her own money. And this parent said, I never thought the day would come that she would do that, and it means everything. She said, my daughter's had every kind of special program imaginable. She's had Reading Recovery, and she's had Orton Gillingham. She's had all of those programs. And I tell you, what works for her is that she's gotta want to read. I'm sorry, but you can't get anywhere without motivation. And she said, and that's something that balanced literacy teachers know. You know, I think about all the times when I've asked teachers, how do you know that your teaching is working? One teacher told me about how she was teaching and she heard a little scratch on the door of her classroom and went and opened the door and found two kids there, hand in hand. They were graduates from her class, moved on to second grade, and they said, can we borrow some books from you? Because our class doesn't have a library. Then she told me about how one time a little boy said to her, can I take 2 books home tonight, one for me and one for my baby brother? Another teacher told me about how when she went to the auditorium with her class and they had to wait for, I think it was choral practice or something, and they just had to wait for a while, so she told them to bring books. And they sat there in this aisle of the auditorium, and she says she looked down that aisle and every one of her first graders was engrossed in a book. And she thought, my teaching's working. From a balanced literacy approach, let's also draw on the recognition that phonics is not the only thing that matters, that from the get-go, kids need to be comprehending as they read. We need to realize that even 5- and 6-year-olds can teach each other what they just learned from a book, or can find a key illustration in a nonfiction book and explain that illustration to another child, even using the fancy words that they've learned from in that book. They can look over a bunch of books that they've read and talk about which books gets the award for teaching the most important life lesson. Or they could talk about a character that changes the most and in the most important ways. Even at age 5 and 6, they can talk and write about claims and share evidence. And they can read books with wonder and learn the power of big questions that ask why and how. And they can respond to those questions by talking about ideas and engaging in discussions where they listen to each other and they say, I want to add on to what you said. Teachers who tend to fall in one camp or the other have somewhat different priorities, but teachers in both these camps want kids to be confident and competent readers. There are thousands of teachers in the United States who embrace science of reading principles and practices. But if you visit their classrooms, you'll find that those classrooms aren't all the same. The science of reading is not just one thing. Teachers have varying knowledge bases, and no matter what, they'll bring their strengths and their passions to their teaching. Similarly, there are thousands of teachers in the United States who embrace balanced literacy principles and practices. But if you were to visit all of their classrooms, you would find that those classrooms look really different. Balanced literacy is not just one thing. Teachers always will bring their own wisdom and their passions and their priorities to their teaching. And while you're on this imaginary whirlwind tour of thousands of American classrooms, I think you'd find that the standout teachers from your whirlwind journey were those who fit the characteristics of the science of reading camp, and who also fit the characteristics of those from the balanced literacy camp. Because in the end, teachers need to take the best of every approach and to vary their instruction based on the particular child with whom they're working. So in the end, it's really important that we are all centrists, not at one end of the seesaw or the other, but in the middle, drawing from all sources so that we can be good for all kids.